Wales. With its lush rolling hills and stunning landscapes, it's where over 3 million people call home. But there's more to Wales than beautiful nature. Today we're going to learn more about Wales and what it really means to be Welsh from an expert. There's a lot to learn about Welsh culture. The Welsh are known for their friendliness and... Oh, hello, thank you. This lovely home belongs to our Welsh expert, Dafydd. Thanks for having us, Dafydd. Wales might be small, but its influence is far-reaching. The land of castles and dragons, Welsh literature like the Mabinogion are the basis of many world-famous stories. J.R. Tolkien even based Elfish on Welsh. By spreading the culture and language of Wales, teachers like Dafydd are keeping the culture alive. Ready to start learning? Over to you, Dafydd.
Shwmai a chroeso. Hello and welcome. My name's Dafidd and I am here to present to you how to become Welsh in 45 minutes. I say shwmai, you say shwmai. That's how we greet each other in Welsh. Shwmai! Shwmai. And our greeting is done. I want to share a little bit about Welsh culture and of course the Welsh language so that you know what it takes to become Welsh yourself. Now, Wales is a little country, about 3.1 million people call Wales home, and it has about 10 million sheep, so now you know where the jokes come from. Wales is a little country next to England. England is on its eastern border, and we share quite a lot of common things, but the Welsh language is something that's quite unique to Wales, but not as unique as you think, as you will find out later in the presentation. Potentially over 4,000 years old, Welsh is one of the oldest languages in Europe. It originates from the Celtic languages which were spoken across Europe as far as Turkey up until the Roman invasion. The Celtic language came to Britain about 600 BC, which evolved into Brythonic, which was the foundation, one of which formed the languages Welsh, Cornish and Breton. Poetry from the 6th century has been preserved. It was passed down through song from generation to generation until it was recorded in books like the Llyfr Coch Hergest and Llyfr Du Caerfyrddin, which were written around 1350. Works from dozens of Welsh poets from around the 12th century are still in circulation today. Henry VIII removed the official status of the Welsh language in 1536. It was restored in 2011 with the Mesur y Gymraeg and the creation of the post Comisiynydd y Gymraeg, who is responsible for ensuring that Welsh is given equal status with English across the board and official documents, etc., etc. And Welsh is also spoken in Patagonia in Argentina. In 1865, 153 intrepid Welsh settlers went on a boat called Mimosa to search for a new land where there was no longer going to be any oppression from the English, oppression on their language. They thought, we want to start again somewhere where our culture and our heritage and our language can be preserved. And 2 months at sea, and they landed in Porthmadryn in Argentina. So now, 155 years later, there are thousands of Welsh speakers in Patagonia, and they have their annual Eisteddfod, and they have close ties to the Welsh government and to the British Council and to the Cymdeithas Cymru Ariannin, which is the Wales-Argentina Society. Up until 1850, around 90% of the population of Wales spoke Welsh, and now these days it's around 20%. So you can see those intrepid voyagers who went on the Mimosa had a bit of a future prediction on what was going on there. One of the reasons for the decline in the language was the Welsh Not. Now, the Welsh Not was a badge a big wooden plank that children would be forced to wear if they were overheard speaking Welsh at school. And if another child was overheard speaking Welsh at school, they would pass on the Welsh knot to that child. And whoever the unfortunate child was wearing the Welsh knot at the end of the day would be lashed by the teacher. And although this practice only lasted a few decades, from the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, the effects were long-lasting, so that even my father had his education entirely in English. I was fortunate enough to have Welsh education, so Welsh education had become a thing by the time I was in school in the 90s and in the 2000s. And it's been growing as a thing since then. Education, Welsh medium education in Cardiff particularly, is very, very strong at the moment, and that in some part goes towards restoring and preserving the language. The government have done lots of work to make sure they've got a certain number of speakers of Welsh by some date in the future. Welsh has 29 letters in the alphabet, including the digraphs ch, th, f, n, th, f, and r. My favourite letter is r, which is a voiceless alveolar trill, and it only appears in less than 12 languages. There is no K, Q, V, X or Z in the Welsh alphabet. So why would you want to learn Welsh? Well, many reasons, of course. One of which is that it's a minority language and Welsh speakers will be so glad to meet you. They'll be so glad to share their language with you. And if you are saying, oh, dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, I'm learning Welsh, then they will immediately start spouting Welsh off at you, and they might find it difficult to stop. But if you slow them down and say, dwi'n dysgu, siaradwch yn araf, I'm a beginner, speak slowly, and they'll be very, very patient with you. So that's a great thing. Another thing, of course, is that it's a phonetic language, which means once you learn what the sounds are, it's very easy to read the language. Welsh has a rich culture of poetry and song, and I want to delve a little bit more into that rich culture later on in this presentation. There's compound words which will never cease to amaze you, like gorffennaf, for example. Gorffennaf. Gorffen is the end. Haf is the summer. Gorffen, haf, gorffennaf is July, the end of the summer. Another one, which may be a little bit offensive to some people here, is lletwyth. Now, lletwyth is made up of the words lled and chwyth. Lled is rather, and chwyth is left. So if you're rather left, rather lefty, then that means you're a little bit awkward and clumsy looking. So sorry if I've offended any left-handed people. Also, gwlad garwr. Gwlad is country. Garwr is lover. Gwlad garwr, someone who loves their country. Patriot, of course. You can also learn to pronounce the longest town name in Europe, which is Llanfair Pwllgwyngyll Goger Chwyrndrobwll Llantysilio Gogogoch. And there's the IPA pronunciation for those of you interested. We don't have time today to go into love spoons and castles, both of which have a deep part in Welsh history and Welsh heritage. We're going to move on now to a little something else. And the most important reason for anyone to learn Welsh is so that you can enjoy the Eisteddfod in all its glory. Now, the Eisteddfod, if you don't know, is a Welsh festival. It's a festival of song, of dance, of poetry, of music, of partying, and it lasts for an entire week, the first week of August. And it's a great, great place to go if you're learning. They've got a pabell dysgwyr, so a learner's tent, and everybody who you meet will be more than happy to speak to you in Welsh. One of the quirks of the Welsh language is that it has initial mutations at the beginning of words. So that means that some letters like cypyda, gybyda, llymrha, which I learned when I was in secondary school, mutate, so the first letter changes. Now there's three different types of mutation. There's a treiglad meddal, which is a soft mutation. There's a treiglad trwynol, which is a nasal mutation. And there's a treiglad llais, which is an aspirate mutation. And there are over 40 different grammatical rules for when you mutate some and when you don't, and etc, etc, etc. And some of you, language geeks, might like to learn all of those 40 and pride yourself on the fact that you always get your mutations correct. And some people will be rather intimidated by that, and they think, oh, I can't learn all those rules, all those mutations, I'll never get it right. And the truth is, it doesn't matter. Nobody gets it right all the time, and certainly people won't worry if you do get it wrong. Mutations are very common in Celtic languages like Manx and Cornish and Breton and Irish and Scots Gaelic. For example, the word cath, which means cat, can mutate in any of the three ways. As you've seen from the table, it's got all three mutations possible. So you could say fy nghath, which means my cat. You could say ei gath, which means his cat. Or you can say ei chath, which means her cat. So the different mutation indicates whose ei it is. So ei gath is masculine, ei chath is feminine. So when I was at school, we had to learn which letters mutated and when, and I learned to say cypyta gybyda llymhra. And you know that the cypyta mutates softly to gybyda, so you're already halfway through the table there. So let's look at a full example of mutation, so the full table. So we've got our three types. We've got our treiglad meddal, treiglad trwynol, and treiglad llais. And the 9 letters that mutate, cypyta gybyda llymhra, only mutate a certain number of times. So cypyta gybyda llymhra, all mutate softly, so they all have a treiglad meddal. Only the first 6 then have a nasal mutation, and then only the first 3 have a aspirate mutation. So it looks like a complicated table, but if you look at the patterns, they kind of break down quite nicely. And you might notice that the cypyta, the hard sounds, mutate to gybyda, which are the next 3 letters that mutate. You want to be careful not to double mutate. So if you've got a word like potel, you don't want to mutate it to botel and then votel. So just be careful of that, just one mutation at a time. So let's look at this. We've got pale, for example, so that's the p sound. So you could say a bale, fy mhale, a fail. So the p changes to a b for a, so his ball. It changes to a m for mine, and it changes to a f, a fail for her ball. So we've got the word tegan, which means toy. So we've got a degan for masculine, fy nhegan for my toy, and a thegan. We've got t changing to d. For mine, it's nha, and then for hers, it's th, a thegan. The last one that has all 3 mutations is ki, so the k sound, ki means dog. We've got a gi, fy nghi, and a chi. So you've got the k changing to a g, to a nha, and to a ch for the aspirate one. Fydd means grave, so this time it's a fydd, fy medd, and a bedd. So you'll notice it's only the first 2 that mutate there. The last one, a bedd for female, doesn't mutate, so it doesn't have an aspirate mutation. Same for dafad. Dafad means sheep. It's a ddafad, fy nafad, and a dafad. So the d becomes a th, or it becomes a n, or it just stays as it is. With gwely, gwely means bed. The first one, a welly, you just drop the G off the front of the word. So gwely becomes welly. For mine, fy ngwely, the g becomes a ng sound. And then a gwely for her bed. So a gwely, he doesn't have any mutation there. Llaw. Llaw is hand. So we've got a law, fy llaw, and a llaw. So it's only the first one that changes there. Only has one mutation. It only has a soft mutation. It goes to L, or it stays as a and stays as a for the third line. We've got for mam. Mam changes to a vam, fy mam, and a mam. So it's only the first one that changes. It only has a soft mutation. The M changes to a V sound. The F in Welsh does make a V sound. If you want to make an F sound, a F, you've got the double F. So that's a little extra bonus tip for you there. And then the last one is rhaw. Rhaw, it's got my favourite letter in it. It changes to a rhaw, so you change the r to a r sound, and then fy rhaw, and then a rhaw. One of the defining things for any culture is the food. Now, unfortunately, the Welsh are not known for their cuisine. We're talking Welsh rarebit, which is essentially just cheese on toast. We're talking lava bread. Now, lava bread is a seaweed called lava, which is boiled to within an inch of its life. And in the olden days, they used to boil it for 10 hours or more, 15 sometimes. There is a cool little video which I made on YouTube if you're interested on how to cook lava bread. We've also got cawl. Now, cawl is a broth made with, these days, lamb or beef, and it's just a broth with meat and vegetables, sometimes potatoes, and lots of leeks, because the Welsh love leeks. We've also got bara brith, which is essentially a kind of cake, a tea loaf made with tea and dried fruit. And finally, we've got pice ar y maen, Welsh cakes, little piglets on the stone. So they are baked traditionally on a bake stone, which may well have been made of slate many years ago. The one that I have is made of cast iron, and it's been passed down to me from my great uncle Des. So it's a treasured family heirloom, and many families in Wales will have Welsh bake stones which have been handed down the generations, because they just never break, which is better than I can say for some pizza stones out there. You know who you are. Okay, so essentially we're going to try and make some Welsh cakes. So the ingredients, or the cynhwysion, are 225 gram o flawd codi, 225 grams of self-raising flour, pinched o halen, pinch of salt, llon llwy de o spices cymysg, teaspoon of mixed spice, 110 gram o fenyn, 110 grams of butter, 55 gram o sugar gwyn man, caster sugar, 55 gram o sultanas, and wy mawr wedi giro, large beaten egg, 2 llwyfwrdd o laeth, 2 tablespoons of milk. So if we're going to make Welsh cakes, why not join me in the kitchen? Welcome to the kitchen. I hope you're in your kitchen at home, and if you haven't got one of these beautiful bake stones handed down by your great uncle Des, then you can use a heavy-based frying pan to do the cooking. Right, let's get started. We've got some flour. Now, I'm going to put some flour in this bowl. Ran out of self-raising flour, so I'm going to have to invent my own self-raising flour by mixing baking powder and plain flour. So we've got 225 grams of flour, halfway. That's great, 225 grams. I'm going to have to add a little bit of baking powder to my plain flour. I think 2 will probably be enough. Then we're going to have a little pinch of salt. Pinchy, 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 pinchy. I want to get 110 grams of butter in with the flour and the salt. So that's the butter and the flour. Now we're going to mix it in, make sure you've got clean hands. Mix it in so it's like breadcrumbs. You don't have to do this, but you know, it's kind of fun. Make sure you take your butter out of the fridge beforehand, otherwise this job gets very, very difficult. We're going to put the raisins, the spice and the sugar in. Mixed spice. 55 grams of sugar. Mix it all up. We need to make sure that the griddle is actually on. We need to make sure the stone, the Cynhwysion, is on. So we want the heat to be small heat, evenly distributed. So we're just gonna leave that on low whilst we mix and roll. In goes the egg. Now you may need up to 2 tablespoons of milk, dau llwy fwrdd or laff, just to bring it all together. Don't need this anymore. Starting to come together, but you may need a little bit of milk. So let's put a little splash of milk in here. That's roughly a tablespoon, I reckon. And you want the dough to come together nicely. That's another tablespoon there. There we go. I think we'll be done with that. So you should have a dough which looks a little bit like this. So then we're just gonna roll this out. Okay, so we're gonna just have a little bit of flour on the surface there. Stop it sticking too much. And we're gonna roll it out. It's probably about 1 centimetre thick. A bit more flour. And then get them on the stone. Get them on the Cynhwysion. Get another one. So they don't take very long to cook. It's a bit of a mystery how long they do take. And depending on how evenly your pan's set, some might take longer than others. This middle one's probably getting there. Yep, there we go, look at that. Beautiful, beautiful. They will be done quite quickly depending on how hot you've got your griddle pan or your Cynhwysion, your stone. So the best way to eat a Welsh cake is with a cup of tea straight off the griddle. Right, I've got my paned. If you're ever in Wales in an emergency, you can say, dwi isie paned. I want a cup of tea. And the Welsh cakes, make sure they're fresh off the griddle. So good. So good. Right, better get back to work. Lovely. From food to song, 2 of culture's most defining features. To be born Welsh is to be born privileged, not with a silver spoon in your mouth, but with music in your heart and poetry in your soul. That's what it means to be Welsh. So let's have a little bit of a sing-song. Now, the song that I'm going to teach you today, and I want you to sing along, the words should appear on the screen. I want you to sing along to Calon Lan. Calon Lan was written by a man called Daniel James in 1892 as a hymn. Since then, it's been found on the terraces of the rugby grounds across the country, and it's one of Wales's most famous songs. And Calon Lan is a song that goes a little bit something like this. Nid dwi'n gofyn bywyd moethus a'r y byd, neu berlau lan. Gofyn rwyf am galon hapus, calon onest, calon lan. Calon lan yn llawn daioni, tegach yw na lili nhw. canu, canu'r dydd a chanu'r nos. Byd y mynd yn olyd bydol, chwe madenydd iddo sy'n. Golid calon lan rinweddol, yn dwy'n bythol elw fyd. Calon lan yn llawn raioni, dec a chiwn a lili nos. Dim ond calon lan a canu, canu'r dydd a chanu'r nos. Hwyr a bol efo y miniad, esgyn a denu'r can. Ar I ddiw mwyn fy ngheidwaith, roddi I mi galon lan. Calon lan yn llawn daioni, dec a chiwn a lili glos. Dim ond calon lan a canu, canu'r dydd a chanu'r nos. Sing along with me if you're not already. Calon lan yn llawn daioni, dec a chiwn a lili glos. Dim ond calon lan a canu, canu'r dydd a chanu'r nos. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little sing-song, and I hope you sung along with me at home. That song, Calon Lan, is arguably more famous these days as a rugby song. The songs from the churches would have filled the rugby terraces many years ago, and this is one of the songs that has persevered and lasted until the present day, and it is still sung on the rugby terraces today. Well, I won't need my guitar anymore, so I can put this down here. Which brings us to the third thing that defines Welsh culture, rugby. Professor Reverend Roland Williams is credited with bringing rugby to Wales in around 1850. He was a scholar and a fellow at King's College, Cambridge, and he was appointed as Professor of Hebrew at Lampeter University. One of the reasons rugby is thought to have taken off as a sport is because of its similarity to an ancient Welsh game called Knapan. Now, Knapan was a game played between parishes, between villages, so there could be up to 1,000 people on each team, and the idea was to get a small, grease-soaked ball from the parish boundary back to the parish church of your own parish by any means necessary. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's just as well that they did away with the horses before rugby took off. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, the language geekery. Now, many of you will be language lovers, many of you will be language learners, and you will remember that I talked about the Eisteddfod as being the pinnacle of Welsh culture, the week-long festival of poetry and song and dancing and festivities and merriment. If you want to get the pinnacle of even the Eisteddfod, you want to win a gadair, the chair. Now, the chair is awarded to the best poem or series of poems written in a specific metre called CYNGHANEDD. So what is CYNGHANEDD? It is a strict metre by which to write your poetry. CYNGHANEDD is the most sophisticated system of sound patterning practiced in any poetry system in the world. And that's according to the Princeton Encyclopedia of Poetry and Poetics. So let's delve a little bit into what CYNGHANEDD actually is. So there are four main types of CYNGHANEDD. We have the CYNGHANEDD Lisg, the CYNGHANEDD GROES, the CYNGHANEDD Draws, and the CYNGHANEDD SAIN. The CYNGHANEDD Lisg is a pattern based on rhyme. The CYNGHANEDD GROES and Draws are both patterns on consonant alliteration. and then the gynghanedd SAIN is a mixture of the two. It has both rhyme and consonant alliteration. So let's have a look at some examples of these. So in the three first types of cynghanedd, the sentence, the line is split into two parts, and the end of the first part is called the orffwysfa, the resting point, and the last but one syllable is called the goben. Now, for a cynghanedd lisg, there has to be a rhyme between the end of the first half, so at the end of the orffwysfa, and the goben, so the last but one syllable of the line. So we see this line, taw ath sôn, gad fi'n llonydd. So you can see the last word, llonydd, the accent is on the last but one word, which has to be the case for a gynghanedd lisg, llonydd. The rhyming part of that llonydd is on. So then we see the taw ath sôn. So sôn rhymes with on, so taw ath sôn, gad fi'n llonydd is where you see the pattern of rhyme there. It's not like the traditional rhyme where you have the end of the word rhyming, it's the last but one syllable which has to rhyme. And frightful a nightfall, folded rueful a day. That's an example of an English cynghanedd lisg. So we see at the end of nightfall, the end of the orffwysfa, the fall rhymes with the full of the last but one syllable, the goben. So we're having poetic license to put fuller into one syllable. So the fuller rhymes with the full, and that's how you get a cynghanedd lisg. Now for the cynghanedd GROES and the cynghanedd draws, there is a pattern between the first half and the second half of consonant alliteration, and it's around the accent of the line. So as you read the line, it will naturally split into two halves. Remember that the halfway point is called the orffwysfa, and so the consonant alliteration has to be the same in the first half and the second half, around the accent of the line. Now, with the gynghanedd draws, you can skip over some of the letters, so you only need one actually consonant matching up. But with the gynghanedd GROES, you need all of the consonants matching up. So we see the line, tithau'n drist a than dy ro, which means you sad and in your grave, which is a poem which was written about a famous Welsh poet who won the Gadair Ddu, which was the Gadair awarded to the in the Eisteddfod of 1914, and sadly was not alive to claim his prize. He'd written this poem, which was the best poem that year, and sadly died in the war. So that's why they call it a Gadair Ddu, the black chair, because he was never there to pick it up. So we see here the th and the d and the in the first half of the line and in the second half of the line, the th, d, So that's where a cynghanedd draws comes in. We've even got a French example. Où est le musée de musique? We've got the M and the S and the M and the S of musée, musique, matching up with the alliteration, the consonant pattern, either side of the orffwysfa. And the fourth type of cynghanedd is the cynghanedd SAIN. Now this is a little bit different. We don't have two parts to the line now, we have three parts. So the line is split into three parts, and there is a rhyme between the first and the second part, and then there is the consonant alliteration between the second part and the third part. Estron, lladron a llwydrew. Foreign, thieves, and frost. Doesn't really make sense to me, but I'm sure the poets at the time and the people reading it knew what they were talking about. So we have estron and lladron, the first two parts, rhyming, the on at the end, and then the lladron and the llwydrew, the ll and the ll, have the consonant alliteration. So we don't need all the consonant matching, just the at least one. Here we have estron and lladron rhyming, and then we also have the ll and the d and the ll and the d from lladron and llwydrew matching up for the alliteration. And how about this one? This is one for you at home. Make fish the dish of the day. Can you see the Cynghanedd sign there? Now, I hope you're with me at least a little bit so far. If you are already starting to switch out, thank you for listening, and I hope you visit Wales at some point. Now, if I haven't lost you, I'm going to move on to writing I'm not going to write an ENGLYN. I'm going to explain an ENGLYN to you. Now, an ENGLYN is not just a strict Cynghanedd like we've seen here, but is even stricter than that. So an ENGLYN is a poem which has 10 syllables in the first line, 6 in the second line, 7 in the third line, and 7 in the fourth line. And they're very, very popular. Now, you might have an ENGLYN written for a wedding, or for a funeral, or for some kind of celebration. You might commission a poet to write one of these englynion for you. And they're very, very fascinating poems. So, I'm going to read a book. I'm not going to read you the whole book, I'm just going to read you one ENGLYN. Gwai farged weled dialedd, ei blwyf, gwai ei blant o'i orwedd. Gwai elliw bod ei ddiwedd, a gwai fallt o gai ei fedd. Now, I want to just spend a little bit of time breaking that down a little bit. Now, you can see the first line has got 10 syllables. So we've got gwai, farged, weled, dialedd, ei blwyf. And it's also split up into 2 parts. We've got a little dash in the middle. Now, the little dash is called a gwant. And you may be thinking, hang on, it doesn't rhyme at the end. But the ei blwyf part of it is just part of the next line. We'll see that in a minute. But the dialedd, orwedd, ddiwedd, and fedd, they all rhyme. It gets even more complicated. So we've got the first line, which has got between 7 and 9 syllables before the gwant, and then obviously then between 3 and 1 after the gwant. And the Cynghanedd only has to happen at the first part of the line before the gwant. Then the third line and the fourth line, these are a couplet. Now, with a couplet, they have to rhyme, but you also have to get the accents right. Now, with a Welsh couplet, you have to have an accented word and a non-accented word. So, gair acenog a gair diacen, which means in one of them, the emphasis of the word falls on the last syllable. So here it's in the fourth line. Gwai fallt o gai ei fedd. Fedd is just one syllable. And then it rhymes with diwedd, which is a non-accented word, which means the accent falls on the last but one. So do you remember the word goben? The goben, the accent falls on the goben. So ddiwedd. So ddiwedd, you can hear ddiwedd. The accent is on the ddiw, and the edd kind of just is the second part of the word. And the ddiwedd rhymes with fedd. And one of the other rules is you can't have a Cynghanedd lisg in the last line. So let's break it down a little bit more. Gwai farged weled dialedd. So we've got the farged and the weled rhyming. And we've also got the L from the weled and the L from the dialedd matching, and the D from the farged and the D from the dialedd matching. So we've got rhyming and consonant alliteration, which makes it a Cynghanedd sign. So we'll go to the third line. We'll come back to the second line in a minute. Gwai elliw bod ei ddiwedd. You might be thinking, I can't see any consonant alliteration there. And you'd be right, because this is a Cynghanedd lisg. So we can't have a Cynghanedd lisg on the last line, but we can have a Cynghanedd lisg on the third line. So we've got the elliw, the yw, rhymes with the goben, the last but one syllable of ddiwedd. So ddiw, elliw, they rhyme. So gwai elliw bod ei ddiwedd. So that makes it a Cynghanedd lisg. Now we've got a great Cynghanedd groes here because all of the consonants are matching. We've got a gwaifallt o gai ei fedd. So gwaifallt is the first half of the line before the orffwysfa. Then o gai ei fedd is the second half. And we've got the g from the gwai, the g from the gai, and the v from the vallt, and the v from the fedd matching up. So consonant alliteration there. So that makes it Cynghanedd groes. So you may be thinking for the second line, where is the Cynghanedd? Now the Cynghanedd isn't in the second line alone. It is actually in the end of the first line and the first part of the second line. So the ei blwyf is where we start reading. So we've got ei blwyf, gwai ei blant o'i orwedd. So the bull from the blwyf and the bull from blant alliterate, they match up. And the o'i orwedd isn't there, which is why it's called a Cynghanedd draws bengoll. Now pengoll means lost end. So lost end. So the o'i orwedd is lost to the Cynghanedd, but it is important for the rhyme. That was a little bit complicated. There are many rules, and there are different types of Cynghanedd SAIN, different types of Cynghanedd lisg, which we haven't got time to go through today, but hopefully you will have enjoyed the poem and hopefully you will have learned something. And you never know, maybe one day you might enter the gadair to win that chair for the best poem. Let's read the poem one more time. Gwai farged weled dialedd ei blwyf, gwai ei blant o'i orwedd. Gwai elliw bod ei ddiwedd, a gwai fallt o gai ei fedd. Okay, thank you all for watching this far into the video. I hope now you know a little bit more about what it means to be Welsh and you know a little bit more about Welsh culture than you did before. So if you love Welsh food, you can sing Welsh songs, you can watch Welsh rugby, and you can write poetry, then you'll know a little bit more about what it means to be Welsh and become a little bit more Welsh yourself. Okay, diolch am wrando. Thank you for listening. A hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.